For more than 1,000 years, one institution stood at the center of faith, power, and mystery in the Western world. Behind the walls of Vatican City, decisions were made that shaped kings, guided empires, and influenced the lives of millions who would never see Rome with their own eyes. To many believers, the Vatican represented spiritual authority and divine guidance. But to others, it represented something far more powerful, a force that guarded knowledge, protected influence, and quietly watched over the course of history. And wherever great power exists, opposition eventually rises from the shadows. Throughout the centuries, whispers began to circulate across Europe. Stories of secret brotherhoods meeting in candle-lit chambers, ancient orders that operated behind closed doors, groups of scholars, warriors, philosophers, and rebels who believed the world should not be controlled by a single spiritual authority. Some of these organizations were small and disappeared without leaving a trace. Others grew so powerful that even kings feared them, and a few would eventually become legendary. The Knights Templar, the Freemasons, the mysterious Illuminati. Their names echo through history, often wrapped in rumor and speculation. Were they enemies of the Vatican, guardians of hidden knowledge, or simply misunderstood societies caught in the struggle between power and belief? The truth is far more complicated, because for centuries, a quiet conflict unfolded beneath the surface of European history. Not a war fought with armies and banners, but a struggle of influence, secrets, and ideas. A battle that took place in hidden archives, secret rituals, coded letters, and silent alliances. Some of the most powerful organizations in history would challenge the authority of the Church. Some would be hunted, condemned, and erased. Others would vanish into legend. And a few may still exist today. So tonight, we step into one of the most mysterious chapters of human history. A story filled with secret oaths, forbidden knowledge, and powerful institutions that operated in the shadows of the Vatican itself. Because the official history tells only part of the story. The rest was written in secret.
Long before modern nations existed, before borders were drawn on maps, and before the idea of democracy took root, Europe was a land shaped by kingdoms, feudal lords, and an institution whose influence stretched far beyond stone walls and cathedral towers. At the center of that influence stood the Vatican. From the city of Rome, the Catholic Church gradually built one of the most powerful institutions the world had ever known. Its authority was not based on armies alone, nor on wealth alone, but on something far more enduring: faith. For millions of people across medieval Europe, faith was not merely a private belief. It was the structure of life itself. It determined how people married, how they buried their dead, how they understood suffering, and how they imagined the world beyond death. And the Vatican stood as the guardian of that belief. The Pope was not simply a religious leader. In the minds of many, he was the earthly representative of divine authority. Kings sought his blessing. Emperors feared his disapproval. Entire nations adjusted their policies according to the judgments that came from Rome. In an age where literacy was rare and knowledge moved slowly across vast distances, the Church controlled something even more powerful than land or gold. It controlled truth. Monasteries copied manuscripts by hand, preserving ancient texts and religious teachings. Cathedrals dominated the skylines of growing cities, reminding everyone who passed beneath their shadows that the Church stood above earthly authority. Priests interpreted the scriptures, bishops governed vast territories, and the Pope held the final voice in matters of doctrine. From the outside, the structure appeared unshakable. But beneath that stability lay a world filled with questions. Europe during the Middle Ages was not as quiet or obedient as later legends might suggest. Travelers carried stories from distant lands. Merchants exchanged ideas along with spices and silk. Scholars debated philosophy in the growing universities of Paris, Bologna, and Oxford. Ideas moved slowly, but they moved, and sometimes those ideas began to challenge the authority that Rome had carefully built. Not all disagreements were dramatic. Many began quietly. A monk questioning a theological interpretation, a scholar studying ancient Greek texts that seemed to offer a different vision of the universe, a wandering preacher who believed the church had grown too wealthy and too powerful. At first, these voices were small, but the church had long understood a simple truth about ideas. Even the smallest spark can spread. So the Vatican created systems to protect its authority. Councils were held to define official doctrine. Bishops monitored religious teachings within their regions. Those who openly rejected the authority of the church could be declared heretics. In medieval Europe, that word carried enormous weight. A heretic was not simply someone with a different opinion. A heretic was believed to threaten the spiritual safety of entire communities. To question the church was to question the path to salvation itself. And that meant dissent was not merely discouraged, it was feared. By the 12th century, the church had begun to face movements that were far larger than isolated critics. Entire groups of believers started to form their own interpretations of Christianity. Some rejected the wealth of the church. Others promoted radically different spiritual ideas. One such movement appeared in southern France. They were later known as the Cathars. Their beliefs differed dramatically from those taught in Rome. They rejected many of the rituals of the Catholic Church and promoted a vision of spiritual purity that attracted thousands of followers. To church leaders, this was not simply a disagreement. It was a challenge to the entire structure of religious authority. The response was swift and decisive. Campaigns were launched to eliminate what the church considered dangerous teachings. Religious courts were established to investigate accusations of heresy. Over time, these systems evolved into what historians would later call the Inquisition. The message was clear. Unity of belief would be maintained. But as the church strengthened its systems of control, another phenomenon quietly began to emerge across Europe. Secret gatherings. Not all of them were rebellious. Some were simple brotherhoods formed by craftsmen or merchants who shared professional knowledge and mutual protection. Others were more mysterious. Groups that met in private halls or hidden rooms. Organizations where members swore oaths of loyalty and secrecy. In many cases, these groups existed simply to protect their members in a world that could be unpredictable and dangerous. But secrecy itself often attracted suspicion. Rumors began to circulate, stories of hidden teachings, symbols whose meanings were known only to those inside the group. Rituals performed behind closed doors. To church authorities, secrecy posed a problem. An institution that claimed spiritual authority over all believers could not easily tolerate organizations whose teachings were hidden from public view. Yet the medieval world was changing. Trade routes expanded across continents. Cities grew larger and more complex. Warriors traveled across distant lands during the Crusades, encountering cultures and ideas that were unfamiliar to Europe. Some returned with more than stories. They returned with knowledge, and sometimes with secrets. Among the many orders formed during the era of the Crusades, one would eventually become the most famous and controversial of all. At first, they were seen as heroes, warrior monks who pledged themselves to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. They wore simple white cloaks marked with a red cross. Their discipline and courage earned admiration across Europe. Kings supported them. The Church blessed their mission. But over time, the order grew far more powerful than anyone had expected. They established networks of fortresses across continents. They developed systems of banking that allowed wealth to move safely across dangerous territories. Nobles entrusted them with treasures and land. Within a few generations, they had become one of the most influential organizations in the medieval world. And with that influence came something even more dangerous: mystery. Because the Knights Templar did not simply operate as soldiers, they operated as a brotherhood. Their ceremonies were private, their internal rules were known only to initiates, and their headquarters in Jerusalem had once stood near one of the most sacred and ancient locations in human history: the Temple Mount. Over the centuries, whispers began to spread across Europe. Some claimed the Templars had discovered ancient knowledge hidden beneath the ruins of Jerusalem. Others believed they had uncovered sacred relics or forgotten scriptures. Most of these stories were impossible to verify, but mystery has a way of growing with time, and the more powerful the order became, the more those rumors multiplied. By the early 14th century, the Knights Templar had accumulated extraordinary wealth and influence. Too much, some believed, especially for an organization that answered primarily to the Pope. Kings who had once admired the Templars began to see them differently, not simply as defenders of pilgrims, but as a force that stood outside the control of ordinary rulers. And in medieval politics, independence could be dangerous. Soon, the balance between admiration and suspicion would collapse. A dramatic confrontation was approaching, one that would shake Europe, destroy one of the most powerful orders of the Middle Ages, and ignite centuries of speculation about what secrets might have vanished along with them. Because on a single morning in the year 1307, across the Kingdom of France, hundreds of Knights Templar would be arrested at the same time. What followed would become one of the most shocking events in medieval history, and it would mark the beginning of a legend that still fascinates historians and storytellers today. By the early Middle Ages, the authority of the Catholic Church had spread across nearly every corner of Western Europe. Cathedrals rose above cities and villages alike, their towering spires visible from miles away. Monasteries dotted the countryside, places where monks devoted their lives to prayer, study, and the careful preservation of sacred texts. To many people, this vast network created a sense of order in a world that could often feel uncertain. Wars between kingdoms were common. Famines and plagues could appear without warning. In such a world, the Church offered something powerful: a sense of meaning. Priests baptized newborn children. They blessed marriages. They performed the rituals that accompanied death and burial. The Church stood beside people during every important moment of life. But institutions that shape the lives of millions inevitably face questions. Even in an age where most people accepted the authority of Rome without hesitation, there were individuals who believed that the Church had strayed from the simplicity of the teachings it claimed to defend. Some critics spoke about wealth. Over the centuries, the Church had accumulated vast lands and treasures. Cathedrals required enormous resources to build. Bishops sometimes lived in residences that resembled the palaces of nobles. For believers who imagined the early followers of Christianity living in humility and poverty, this growing wealth seemed troubling. Others questioned the structure of authority itself. They wondered why spiritual guidance required such an elaborate hierarchy, why a priest must stand between the believer and God, why sacred texts could only be interpreted by those who held official positions within the Church. At first, these questions spread quietly, carried through conversations in monasteries, marketplaces, and small gatherings of scholars. But eventually, Some groups began forming entirely new communities around these ideas. One of the most striking examples emerged in the 12th century in the regions of southern France and northern Italy. They would later become known as the Cathars. Their beliefs were deeply different from those taught by the Catholic Church. While Christianity traditionally taught that the physical world was created by God, the Cathars believed something far more radical. They believed the material world itself was flawed. According to their teachings, the physical realm was a place of corruption and suffering. True spiritual purity could only be achieved by rejecting many of the structures and rituals that defined the Catholic Church. Their communities practiced strict lifestyles. Many rejected wealth and possessions. Their leaders lived with remarkable simplicity, traveling from town to town and teaching what they believed to be a purer form of spiritual truth. To many ordinary people, this message was appealing. It spoke to frustrations that had slowly grown over time. Some saw the Cathars as honest reformers who wanted to restore the humility of early Christianity. But from the perspective of Rome, the situation looked very different. The Church did not see a peaceful reform movement. It saw a direct threat to the unity of Christian belief. If alternative interpretations of faith were allowed to spread freely, the entire structure of religious authority could begin to fracture. Different regions might adopt different teachings. Communities might follow their own spiritual leaders rather than the clergy appointed by the Church. For an institution that believed it was responsible for guiding humanity towards salvation, such fragmentation was unacceptable. The response began cautiously. Church leaders sent missionaries and scholars to debate the Cathar teachers. They hoped that careful arguments and theological discussions would persuade the movement to return to orthodox belief. But the effort achieved little success. The Cathar communities continued to grow. By the early 13th century, the movement had become deeply rooted in parts of southern France. Entire towns openly supported their teachings. Some local nobles even offered protection. At that point, the situation changed dramatically. In 1209, Pope Innocent III authorized a military campaign against the Cathars. It became known as the Albigensian Crusade. Unlike earlier crusades directed toward distant lands, this campaign unfolded within Europe itself. Armies marched into the region of Languedoc, determined to eliminate what the Church considered a dangerous heresy. The conflict was brutal. Cities were besieged, entire communities were destroyed. In some cases, soldiers were unable to distinguish between Cathar believers and ordinary Catholics who lived in the same towns. One chronicler recorded a chilling phrase attributed to a commander during the siege of Béziers: "Kill them all. God will know his own." Whether the words were spoken exactly as written is uncertain, but the story reflects the intensity of the campaign. Over the following decades, the Cathar movement was gradually dismantled. Strongholds fell one by one. Leaders were captured or forced into hiding. Yet military action alone was not enough. The Church recognized that it needed a more systematic method to investigate and prevent the spread of heresy. From this need emerged a powerful new institution: the Inquisition. Unlike ordinary courts, the Inquisition focused specifically on matters of belief. Trained investigators questioned witnesses, examined accusations, and determined whether individuals had secretly adopted forbidden teachings. Those found guilty could face severe punishment. Some were ordered to perform acts of public repentance. Others were imprisoned. In the most extreme cases, individuals could be handed over to secular authorities for execution. The goal was not only to punish dissent, but also to prevent it from spreading. Across Europe, the message became clear: religious unity would be protected. Yet while the Church strengthened its ability to confront open challenges, another form of opposition was beginning to develop more quietly. Groups that avoided public preaching, organizations that did not openly challenge the church through sermons or mass movements. Instead, they operated behind closed doors. These early secret societies often formed around shared professions or intellectual interests. Skilled craftsmen, for example, sometimes organized into brotherhoods that protected trade knowledge and offered mutual support. Stonemasons who built cathedrals developed particularly strong networks. Their work required specialized skills that few people possessed. Knowledge of geometry, engineering, and construction techniques allowed them to create structures that seemed almost miraculous for their time. Because they traveled from one construction site to another across Europe, these craftsmen developed systems of recognition and trust, symbols, handshakes, private meetings where knowledge could be exchanged safely among members. At first, these organizations had little to do with religious conflict. But secrecy always invites curiosity, and curiosity often becomes suspicion. To outside observers, these private gatherings appeared mysterious. Why were certain discussions hidden from public view? Why were oaths of loyalty required for membership? Why did some brotherhoods guard their teachings so carefully? Over time, rumors began to grow. Stories circulated about hidden philosophies, forbidden knowledge, and secret rituals that took place beyond the sight of ordinary believers. Some of these stories were exaggerated. Others may have contained fragments of truth. What mattered most was perception. For leaders within the church, the existence of organizations operating beyond their direct authority raised difficult questions. Could such groups spread ideas that challenged official doctrine? Could they influence politics or society without oversight? And perhaps most concerning of all, could they develop loyalties that competed with the authority of Rome? These concerns would become even more serious when one particular order began to rise to extraordinary prominence during the era of the Crusades. They were not secret in the beginning. In fact, they were celebrated. Knights who had sworn sacred vows to defend pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Their reputation for discipline and courage earned admiration across Christendom. But over time, their power expanded far beyond the battlefield. They accumulated wealth. They built fortresses. They developed networks that connected distant regions of Europe and the Middle East. And inside their order, members followed strict rituals known only to initiates. To the outside world, they appeared both admirable and mysterious. Their name would soon become one of the most famous in medieval history: the Knights Templar. At first, they were trusted allies of the Church, but in the years ahead, suspicion would begin to grow. Whispers would circulate about what the Templars might have discovered during their long presence in Jerusalem, and eventually, those whispers would help ignite one of the most dramatic confrontations between power and secrecy that Europe had ever seen. In the early years of the 12th century, the world of medieval Europe was still deeply shaped by the aftermath of the First Crusade. In 1099, armies from Western Europe had captured the city of Jerusalem after a long and brutal campaign. For many Christians, the victory carried enormous spiritual meaning. Jerusalem was not simply another city, it was the sacred center of biblical history, a place where ancient events had unfolded that defined the foundation of their faith. But capturing the city had not solved every problem. Jerusalem stood far from Europe. The long roads leading to the Holy Land were dangerous, stretching across unfamiliar territories where travelers often faced bandits, political instability, and harsh landscapes. Pilgrims from across Europe still dreamed of visiting the sacred sites described in Scripture, yet many never returned from the journey. Protecting these travelers became a growing concern. Around the year 1119, a small group of knights proposed a solution that seemed both practical and deeply symbolic. Led by a French nobleman named Hugues de Payan, the group offered to dedicate themselves to defending Christian pilgrims traveling through the Holy Land. They would live not as ordinary soldiers. Instead, they would combine the life of a knight with the discipline of a monk. Their proposal was unusual for its time. Knights were typically warriors who fought for personal glory, land, or loyalty to a lord. Monks, by contrast, lived quiet lives devoted to prayer and spiritual contemplation. The idea of combining these two roles created something entirely new, a brotherhood of warrior monks. The rulers of the newly established Kingdom of Jerusalem accepted their offer. The knights were granted quarters within the royal palace, which had been built on a site believed to be connected with the ancient Temple of Solomon. Because of this location, the group soon became known by a new name, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. Over time, that long title would be shortened to something far more familiar, the Knights Templar. At the beginning, their numbers were small. For several years, the order consisted of only a handful of knights who patrolled dangerous roads, escorting pilgrims through regions where ambushes were common. But the idea of the Templars captured the imagination of Europe. Here were warriors who fought not for wealth or conquest, but for faith. They took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They pledged to defend Christian travelers and the holy sites of Jerusalem. Their mission seemed noble and pure. Word spread across Europe, and support began to grow. In 1129, the Church officially recognized the order during the Council of Troyes. With this recognition came enormous advantages. The Templars answered directly to the Pope rather than to local rulers. This meant they could operate across borders with a degree of independence that few organizations possessed. Donations began to flow from across Christendom. Nobles offered land. Kings granted privileges. Wealthy families gave money, equipment, and horses to support the order's mission. Within a few decades, the Knights Templar had expanded far beyond their original patrols in the Holy Land. They established headquarters, farms, and fortresses across Europe. Their estates produced grain, wine, livestock, and other valuable goods. The income supported their military campaigns in the Middle East. But the Templars also developed something even more remarkable: a financial network that stretched across continents. Travel during the medieval period was dangerous, especially when carrying large amounts of gold or silver. Pilgrims and merchants risked robbery on remote roads. Transporting wealth over long distances was a constant challenge. The Templars introduced a solution that historians often describe as an early form of banking. A traveler could deposit money at a Templar house in one part of Europe and receive a coded document confirming the amount. When the traveler arrived in the Holy Land, that document could be exchanged for the same funds at another Templar location. This system allowed people to move wealth across thousands of miles without carrying physical coins. It was revolutionary. As more people trusted the system, the order's influence expanded even further. Kings borrowed money from the Templars to finance wars. Nobles stored their treasures in Templar strongholds, believing the order's fortresses offered unmatched security. The Brotherhood of Warrior Monks had quietly become one of the most powerful financial institutions in medieval Europe. Yet, despite their growing wealth, the Templars continued to present themselves as humble servants of faith. Their clothing reflected this image. Each knight wore a white cloak, symbolizing purity. Upon the cloak was sewn a simple red cross, representing their willingness to sacrifice their lives in defense of Christianity. Their internal rules were strict. Members ate simple meals. They slept in shared quarters. Personal possessions were forbidden. Even their horses were considered property of the order rather than of individual knights. To outsiders, this combination of discipline, wealth, and secrecy created a powerful aura. The Templars seemed both admirable and mysterious. Part of the mystery came from the structure of the organization itself. Like many religious orders, the Templars conducted private ceremonies for new members. Initiates swore sacred oaths that bound them to the Brotherhood for life. These rituals were known only to those who had joined the order. Such secrecy was not unusual among medieval religious communities. Monastic orders often had private traditions and internal practices, but the scale of the Templar organization made the secrecy more noticeable. Their headquarters in Jerusalem stood near one of the most ancient and contested locations in the world, the Temple Mount. For centuries, this site had held enormous religious significance for multiple faiths. It was believed to be connected to the original Temple of Solomon described in biblical history. When the Templars established their base there, they gained access to structures and underground spaces that had existed for generations. What they did inside those spaces became the subject of endless speculation. Some later writers suggested that the Knights conducted excavations beneath the ruins of the ancient temple. According to these stories, they may have searched for lost relics, sacred artifacts, or forgotten manuscripts hidden during earlier eras of conflict. Historical evidence for such discoveries remains uncertain, but the rumors themselves began to circulate widely. Stories traveled along trade routes and through noble courts. Some claimed the Templars had uncovered ancient wisdom that predated Christianity. Others believed they had found objects connected to biblical legends. Most of these tales likely grew through imagination and exaggeration. Yet the combination of wealth, secrecy, and sacred locations created fertile ground for speculation. Meanwhile, the political landscape of the Crusader states grew increasingly unstable. Over the course of the 12th and 13th centuries, Muslim forces gradually regained strength in the region. The balance of power shifted through a series of wars, alliances, and shifting borders. The Templars fought in many of these battles. Their reputation as fierce and disciplined warriors became legendary. In several battles, they fought to the last man rather than retreat, a demonstration of the absolute loyalty expected within the order. But military courage could not prevent the slow decline of the Crusader kingdoms. In 1187, the city of Jerusalem was recaptured by the forces of Saladin after the Battle of Hattin. The loss shocked Europe and forced Christian forces to retreat toward coastal strongholds. For the Templars, it marked the beginning of a long struggle to maintain their presence in the region. They continued to fight for another century, defending castles and supporting crusading armies that arrived from Europe. But the strategic situation continued to deteriorate. By the end of the 13th century, the last major Christian strongholds in the Holy Land had fallen. In 1291, the city of Acre, the final major Crusader base, was captured after a brutal siege. With that defeat, the era of Crusader states effectively ended. For the Knights Templar, the consequences were profound. Their original mission had been to defend pilgrims and protect Christian territories in the Holy Land. Now those territories were gone. The order still possessed enormous wealth, vast estates, and a powerful international network, but the purpose that had justified their existence was suddenly uncertain. Back in Europe, powerful rulers began to notice something troubling. The Templars owned lands across multiple kingdoms. They controlled large financial resources, and they answered primarily to the Pope rather than to local monarchs. In an age when kings constantly struggled to consolidate authority, such independence was difficult to ignore. Among the rulers watching closely was the King of France. His name was Philip IV. He faced enormous financial pressures after years of war and political conflict. Debts weighed heavily on the royal treasury, and one of the institutions that held considerable wealth within his kingdom was the Knights Templar. At first, the relationship between Philip and the Templars appeared stable, but behind the scenes, tensions were beginning to grow. Rumors about the order's secret rituals began circulating more frequently. Accusations emerged that their initiation ceremonies involved strange and unorthodox practices. Some stories were clearly exaggerated. Others were more difficult to dismiss. What mattered most was that suspicion had begun to spread. And in the complex world of medieval politics, suspicion could become a powerful weapon. Within a few years, those suspicions would erupt into one of the most dramatic and controversial actions ever taken against a powerful order. A coordinated arrest that would unfold across an entire kingdom on a single morning. An event that would bring the Knights Templar to the edge of destruction and leave behind mysteries that historians still debate today. By the beginning of the 14th century, the Knights Templar had existed for nearly 200 years. What had started as a small brotherhood of warrior monks guarding dangerous roads in the Holy Land had grown into one of the most powerful organizations in medieval Europe. Their castles stood across multiple kingdoms. Their financial networks moved wealth between distant regions. Their members answered directly to the Pope, operating with a level of independence that few institutions could match. But power in the medieval world rarely existed without consequences. Across Europe, monarchs were strengthening their authority. Kings sought greater control over land, taxation, and military forces. Independent organizations with wealth and influence could quickly become political complications. Among these rulers, one man watched the Templars with particular attention: Philip IV of France. Philip was a determined and ambitious king who believed strongly in the power of the monarchy. During his reign, he had already confronted other institutions that challenged his authority. He had clashed with the papacy over taxation and political influence. His conflicts with Pope Boniface VIII had pushed the boundaries between royal power and church authority. But Philip faced another pressing problem: money. Years of warfare and political struggles had placed enormous strain on the royal treasury. Maintaining armies and administering a large kingdom required vast resources. At times, the king had borrowed money from wealthy groups within his realm, including the Knights Templar. The Templars held significant financial influence in France. Their fortified buildings protected valuable assets. Nobles trusted them with deposits. Their banking system allowed wealth to circulate safely across Europe. For a king struggling with debt, such an institution could appear both useful and threatening. At first, there was little public sign of conflict. The Templars continued to operate their estates and financial services. Their headquarters in Paris stood as a large fortified complex known as the Temple. Within its walls were administrative offices, living quarters, and secure vaults where valuables were stored. Yet, behind the scenes, a plan was slowly forming. Philip began collecting accusations against the order. Informants claimed that secret ceremonies within the Templars involved strange and disturbing rituals. Some alleged that initiates were required to deny Christ during their induction. Others claimed that mysterious idols were worshipped within the order. These accusations were difficult to verify. Templar initiation ceremonies were private, known only to members of the Brotherhood. In an age where secrecy often encouraged suspicion, rumors could spread quickly. For Philip, these rumors presented an opportunity. If the order could be accused of heresy, the Church itself might be compelled to act against them. And if the Templars were condemned, their immense wealth could potentially fall under royal control. The king began preparing carefully. Letters were sent across the kingdom to royal officials. The instructions inside these letters were sealed and marked with strict orders not to be opened until a specific date. When that day arrived, the contents would be revealed simultaneously throughout France. The chosen date was Friday, October 13th, 1307. At dawn that morning, royal officers across the kingdom opened their sealed orders. The instructions were clear: arrest every member of the Knights Templar. The operation unfolded with remarkable coordination. Soldiers and officials moved quickly to surround Templar houses and commanderies. Doors were forced open. Knights were seized and taken into custody before they fully understood what was happening. Within hours, hundreds of Templars had been arrested across France. Among them was the Grand Master of the order, Jacques de Molay. De Molay had traveled to Paris only days earlier to attend a royal funeral, unaware that he was walking directly into the center of the trap. Now he found himself imprisoned along with many of his fellow knights. The charges announced by the crown were shocking. The Templars were accused of heresy, blasphemy, and immoral conduct. According to the accusations, their secret initiation ceremonies required new members to deny Christ, spit upon the cross, and participate in forbidden rituals. They were also accused of worshiping mysterious idols and engaging in practices considered deeply offensive to Christian belief. For the public, these allegations were both startling and confusing. The Templars had long been seen as defenders of Christianity. Their reputation for courage in battle and devotion to faith had been widely admired. How could such an order suddenly be accused of betraying the very religion it claimed to serve? Yet, in medieval Europe, accusations of heresy carried tremendous weight. The Inquisition had spent decades investigating religious dissent. Confessions obtained during interrogations were often accepted as powerful evidence, and soon, confessions began to appear. Under intense questioning, some arrested Templars admitted to aspects of the charges. Modern historians believe that many of these confessions were obtained through torture, a practice that was unfortunately common in medieval judicial systems. Faced with extreme pain or the threat of death, prisoners often said whatever their interrogators demanded. But at the time, these confessions seemed to confirm the accusations. King Philip moved quickly to spread the news. Documents describing the alleged crimes of the Templars were circulated widely. The story shocked Europe. Many struggled to reconcile the image of noble warrior monks with the disturbing accusations now being presented. The situation also created a difficult position for the Pope. At that time, the head of the Church was Pope Clement V. The Templars answered directly to papal authority, meaning that actions taken against them without papal approval raised serious questions. Initially, Clement was cautious. The speed and scale of the arrests suggested that Philip had acted independently. The Pope demanded explanations and began his own investigation into the accusations. But the political pressure was immense. Philip controlled one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe. Public opinion had already begun shifting as the accusations spread. Reluctantly, Clement authorized a broader inquiry. Across Europe, other rulers began arresting Templars within their territories as well. Investigations and trials were launched in multiple kingdoms. Some authorities treated the prisoners harshly. Others showed greater restraint. The results varied widely. In some regions, the Templars confessed to aspects of the accusations. In others, they firmly denied all wrongdoing. The conflicting testimonies only deepened the mystery. Were the Templars truly guilty of secret heresies hidden within their rituals? Or were the accusations the result of political ambition and fear of their wealth? The trials continued for years. Meanwhile, the fate of the order itself hung in uncertainty. By 1312, under intense political pressure, Pope Clement V issued a decree dissolving the Knights Templar. The official explanation avoided declaring them fully guilty of heresy, but the order was nevertheless disbanded. Its properties were transferred to another military order known as the Knights Hospitaller. Although in practice, many rulers seized Templar assets for themselves. For most members of the order, the story ended quietly. Some were absorbed into other religious institutions. Others faded back into ordinary life. But for the leaders of the order, the conclusion was far more dramatic. Jacques de Molay and several senior Templars remained imprisoned for years while the investigations continued. Eventually, they were brought before a final tribunal in Paris. At first, it seemed they might receive relatively mild sentences of lifelong imprisonment. But during the proceedings, something unexpected happened. De Molay publicly withdrew his earlier confession. Standing before the authorities, he declared that the accusations against the order were false and that the Templars had remained faithful to their beliefs. His defiance shocked the court. Recanting a confession under such circumstances was considered a serious offense. The response was swift. On March 18, 1314, Jacques de Molay and another Templar leader were taken to a small island in the Seine River in the center of Paris. There, they were executed by burning. According to later accounts, de Molay faced his death calmly, proclaiming the innocence of the order and calling upon divine justice. Whether every detail of that final moment is historically accurate remains uncertain. But the destruction of the Knights Templar left behind something powerful, a legend. Because when the order vanished, many questions remained unanswered. What had truly happened during their secret ceremonies? What had become of their enormous wealth? And perhaps most intriguing of all, whether some members of the Brotherhood had managed to escape the arrests and continue their traditions in secret. In the centuries that followed, stories would emerge suggesting that fragments of the Templar legacy survived. Hidden within new organizations, secret societies that carried forward symbols, rituals, and knowledge passed down through generations. Among those rumored successors was a brotherhood that would eventually spread across Europe and beyond. A society built on symbols, secrecy, and ancient traditions. The Freemasons. When the Knights Templar disappeared in the early 14th century, their fall seemed sudden and absolute. A powerful order that had once commanded castles, fleets, and immense financial resources was dissolved by decree. Its leaders were imprisoned or executed. Its properties were redistributed across Europe. To many observers at the time, the story appeared finished. Another institution had risen, flourished, and then collapsed under the pressures of politics and suspicion. But history rarely ends so neatly. Even as the official structure of the Templar Order vanished, something more complicated began to unfold beneath the surface of European society. Because organizations built over centuries do not simply dissolve overnight. Their members, their knowledge, and their traditions do not vanish with a single proclamation. They scatter. Across the kingdoms of Europe, former Templars suddenly found themselves without the order that had defined their lives. Some were absorbed into other religious institutions. Others quietly returned to the lands they had once left behind. Many disappeared from the historical record entirely. Yet rumors soon began to circulate, suggesting that the Brotherhood had not been completely destroyed. Stories traveled along trade routes and through noble courts. Some claimed that a number of Templars had escaped the coordinated arrests in France. Others suggested that certain commanders had been warned in advance, giving them time to move valuables and documents before royal officers arrived. One story in particular would capture the imagination of later generations. On the night before the arrests of October 1307, several Templar ships were said to have departed from the port of La Rochelle on the western coast of France. According to the story, these vessels carried members of the order along with treasures and secret archives. Where they sailed remains uncertain. Some believed they traveled north towards Scotland. Others imagined distant journeys across the Atlantic or into remote corners of the Mediterranean. Historical records do not confirm these dramatic escapes, yet the persistence of such stories reveals something important. The destruction of the Templars had left behind an atmosphere of mystery that was difficult to extinguish. Part of that mystery came from the nature of the order itself. For nearly 2 centuries, the Templars had operated through a structured network of commanderies spread across many regions. Each location maintained its own records, finances, and internal communications. Even after the order was dissolved, many of those buildings remained standing. Their stone walls had witnessed decades of activity that outsiders had never fully understood. In some regions, local authorities took control of former Templar properties and attempted to inventory the wealth they contained. But the results were inconsistent. Certain estates appeared far less valuable than expected. In other cases, records suggested that significant assets had already been moved elsewhere before royal officials arrived. Whether these discrepancies resulted from normal administrative confusion or from deliberate efforts to hide resources remains a subject of debate among historians. What is certain is that the legend of lost Templar treasure began to grow almost immediately. For centuries afterward, explorers and treasure hunters would search for clues in abandoned castles, remote islands, and hidden caves. Many believed that the order had concealed sacred relics, ancient manuscripts, or vast amounts of gold. These searches rarely produced convincing evidence, yet the stories refused to disappear. Another factor contributed to the enduring fascination with the Templars: their rituals. During the trials, investigators had asked numerous questions about the secret ceremonies that marked the initiation of new members. Under pressure, some prisoners had described unusual elements within those rituals, but the testimonies were inconsistent. Some accounts suggested simple acts of loyalty and humility. Others described disturbing actions that seemed designed to test obedience within the Brotherhood. Because many confessions had been obtained under torture, historians have long questioned their reliability. Nevertheless, the existence of secret rituals continued to capture the imagination of later generations. Medieval society was already familiar with religious orders that maintained private traditions. Monks and monks alike followed internal rules that were not always visible to outsiders. But the Templars were different. They had combined religious devotion with military discipline, wealth, and international influence. Their secrecy seemed tied not only to spiritual practice, but also to the management of power and information. After the order disappeared, some observers began to wonder whether fragments of that tradition might survive elsewhere. Could former members have carried their knowledge into new organizations? Could their symbols and rituals have been preserved within other brotherhoods that operated quietly within European society? Such questions were difficult to answer. Yet, during the centuries that followed, new types of secret societies began appearing across Europe. These groups did not resemble the Templars in every way. Many had no connection to warfare or crusades. Instead, they formed around intellectual exchange, craftsmanship, or philosophical discussion. What they often shared, however, was a commitment to secrecy. Members gathered in private halls. They adopted symbols and codes that allowed them to recognize one another. They developed initiation ceremonies that marked entry into the Brotherhood. And above all, they required oaths of loyalty from those who joined. One of the most influential examples of such organizations emerged gradually from a profession that had played a crucial role in medieval society: stonemasonry. The construction of great cathedrals and castles required extraordinary skill. Architects and master builders understood complex principles of geometry and engineering that were not widely known. Their craft involved both physical labor and intellectual design. Because cathedral projects could last decades or even centuries, masons often traveled from one region to another as new opportunities appeared. This mobility encouraged the formation of networks that allowed skilled workers to find employment and share techniques. Within these networks, systems of recognition developed. A traveling mason arriving at a new construction site might demonstrate his qualifications through particular symbols or hand gestures known within the craft. Lodges provided places where members could gather, discuss their work, and support one another. At first, these organizations functioned primarily as professional guilds. But over time, their structure began to evolve. The lodges developed formal ceremonies welcoming new members. Symbols related to building tools acquired deeper philosophical meanings. Discussions expanded beyond construction techniques to include questions about morality, knowledge, and human nature. In some regions, individuals who were not professional masons were eventually admitted into these lodges as honorary members. Scholars, merchants, and nobles found the atmosphere of intellectual discussion appealing. Gradually, the brotherhood transformed. It became something more than a trade guild. By the 17th century, these evolving lodges would begin to form the foundation of a new and influential society, a society that embraced symbolism, ritual, and secrecy. A brotherhood that would spread across continents and attract members from many levels of society. Its name would become one of the most recognizable among secret organizations in history: Freemasonry. And as this new movement grew, some observers began to draw intriguing connections. The use of secret ceremonies, the language of brotherhood, symbols that hinted at ancient traditions. Could these lodges somehow preserve fragments of knowledge that had once belonged to the Knights Templar? The idea fascinated historians, writers, and conspiracy theorists alike. Direct evidence linking the two orders remained uncertain, yet the possibility itself added another layer to the long and complicated relationship between secret societies and the authority of the Church. Because as Freemasonry continued to grow in the centuries ahead, it would eventually draw the attention of the Vatican itself. And this time, the conflict would not unfold through medieval crusades or royal arrests. It would emerge through ideas. Ideas about knowledge, power, and the role of religion in a changing world. By the 17th century, Europe was entering a new era. The medieval world that had once been dominated by feudal kingdoms and religious authority was slowly transforming. Trade expanded across oceans. Scientific discoveries began reshaping humanity's understanding of nature. Cities grew larger and more complex. Ideas that had once traveled slowly through monasteries and royal courts now moved more freely among scholars, merchants, and craftsmen. Within this changing landscape, a new type of brotherhood was beginning to take shape. Its origins could be traced back to the stonemasons who had built the great cathedrals of the Middle Ages. For centuries, these builders had formed guilds and lodges that protected their knowledge. Constructing a cathedral required far more than physical strength. Master builders understood geometry, mathematics, and architectural principles that were not widely taught. They knew how to design structures that could stand for centuries. They knew how to distribute the weight of massive stone walls and towering arches. They knew how to turn blocks of stone into symbols of faith that dominated the skylines of medieval cities. Because these skills were rare, Masons developed systems to recognize one another as qualified craftsmen. Lodges provided places where members could meet, exchange knowledge, and support one another as they traveled between construction sites. Within these lodges, traditions gradually developed. Members learned particular signs and symbols that identified them as part of the brotherhood. Rituals marked the advancement from apprentice to journeyman and eventually to master mason. These ceremonies were not merely practical, they also carried symbolic meaning. Tools used in construction began to represent deeper ideas. The square symbolized honesty and fairness. The compass represented balance and discipline. The level reminded members of equality among men. Over time, these symbolic teachings expanded beyond the craft of building. They became lessons about character and morality. By the late 16th and early 17th centuries, something unusual began happening within certain lodges. Men who were not professional Masons started to join. These new members were often scholars, merchants, physicians, and members of the educated classes. They were attracted not by the craft of stonework itself, but by the philosophical discussions that had developed within the lodges. These gatherings offered something rare for the time, a space where individuals from different social backgrounds could exchange ideas as equals. In a society still divided by rigid hierarchies, this was remarkable. A nobleman might sit beside a merchant. A scholar might debate with a craftsman. Within the lodge, titles and wealth were meant to matter less than character and knowledge. As more of these non-professional members entered the Brotherhood, the nature of the organization began to change. The old guilds of working Masons slowly evolved into something new: speculative Freemasonry. The term reflected a shift away from physical construction toward philosophical exploration. The tools of the builder remained important, but they now served primarily as symbols. Building a cathedral of stone was no longer the central mission. Instead, members spoke of building something more abstract: the improvement of the human character, the development of wisdom and moral understanding. In 1717, a historic moment occurred in London. Several lodges came together to form what is widely considered the first Grand Lodge of Freemasonry. This organization created a framework that allowed lodges to coordinate their activities and share common traditions. From that point forward, Freemasonry began to spread rapidly. Lodges appeared in cities across Britain, France, the Netherlands, and Germany. Merchants carried the traditions across the Atlantic to the American colonies. Within a few generations, the Brotherhood had become an international network. Its appeal was powerful. Freemasonry promoted ideas that resonated with the changing intellectual climate of the Enlightenment. Members discussed philosophy, science, ethics, and the nature of human progress. They emphasized reason and education. They encouraged tolerance between different religious beliefs, and they promoted the idea that individuals could improve themselves through study and reflection. For many intellectuals of the 18th century, these principles felt both modern and inspiring. But not everyone viewed the growing movement with admiration. The secrecy of Freemasonry immediately attracted attention. Like earlier brotherhoods, the lodges conducted private initiation ceremonies. New members swore oaths of loyalty and discretion. The details of these rituals were not publicly revealed. To members, the secrecy served a practical purpose. It created a sense of trust and unity within the Brotherhood. But to outsiders, secrecy could appear suspicious. Critics wondered what exactly was being discussed behind closed doors. Why were these meetings hidden from public view? What ideas might be circulating within a network that stretched across national borders? Among the institutions watching closely was the Catholic Church. The Vatican had spent centuries defending its authority against movements it believed threatened religious unity. Secret societies operating outside the supervision of the Church raised familiar concerns. Freemasonry did not present itself as a religion. It did not claim to replace Christianity. Yet its principles emphasized freedom of thought and discussion. Within the lodge, men of different religious backgrounds could gather as equals. This idea alone was controversial in a world where religious identity often defined social and political life. Furthermore, Freemasonry required loyalty to the Brotherhood itself. Members promised to protect one another and preserve the secrets of the organization. To church authorities, such oaths created a troubling possibility. Could loyalty to the lodge compete with loyalty to the church? Could discussions within these private gatherings encourage ideas that challenged religious doctrine? As Freemasonry continued to expand throughout Europe, these questions became more urgent. Some political leaders also began to notice the influence of the lodges. Prominent thinkers, writers, and statesmen joined the Brotherhood. Enlightenment philosophers often found the environment of the lodge welcoming to debate and intellectual exchange. In some places, Masonic lodges became centers where new political ideas were discussed. Concepts about liberty, individual rights, and the relationship between government and citizens circulated among members. Many of these ideas would later play important roles in revolutions that reshaped the modern world. Yet, during the early years of Freemasonry, the movement remained primarily a network of philosophical societies. Most lodges focused on personal development, charity, and intellectual discussion. Still, the rapid spread of the organization could not be ignored. By the early 18th century, Freemasonry had reached cities across Europe. Its symbols appeared on buildings and documents. Its members included nobles, scientists, artists, and political leaders. And always, behind the public image of fraternity and philosophical debate, there remained the element that had fascinated observers for centuries: secrecy. The same quality that had once surrounded the Knights Templar now seemed present in this new brotherhood. Private ceremonies, hidden signs of recognition, a structure that allowed members across different countries to recognize one another as part of the same order. For some observers, the similarities were intriguing. Could the traditions of Freemasonry have been influenced by earlier secret societies? Had fragments of older knowledge been passed quietly from generation to generation? The answers were difficult to prove, but the speculation continued to grow. Meanwhile, within the halls of the Vatican, concern about the expanding influence of Freemasonry was beginning to take a more official form. Church leaders debated how to respond to an organization that encouraged philosophical freedom while operating beyond ecclesiastical oversight. In the years ahead, those concerns would lead to decisive action. The first direct confrontation between the Catholic Church and the Freemasons was approaching, and when it arrived, it would mark the beginning of a conflict that would last for centuries. By the early 18th century, Freemasonry had transformed from a network of local lodges into a movement that stretched across much of Europe. From London to Paris, from Amsterdam to Vienna, lodges gathered men who shared an interest in philosophy, knowledge, and moral improvement. Their meetings often took place quietly in private halls or rented rooms. Candles illuminated tables where members discussed ideas that reflected the intellectual spirit of the Enlightenment. They spoke about reason. They spoke about science. They spoke about the possibility that humanity could progress through education and rational thought. For many participants, these discussions felt exciting and hopeful. The old structures of authority that had dominated medieval Europe were slowly being questioned. Scholars studied ancient texts, scientists conducted experiments, and philosophers debated the nature of human rights. Within the lodge, individuals from different backgrounds could exchange ideas freely. A merchant might discuss philosophy with a professor. A nobleman might debate politics with a physician. Titles and wealth were meant to hold less importance than character and intellect. To members of the Brotherhood, this atmosphere represented a new way of thinking about society. But from the perspective of the Catholic Church, the situation looked very different. For centuries, the Church had served as the primary guardian of spiritual authority across Europe. Its doctrines defined the boundaries of religious belief. Its institutions guided moral teachings within communities. Freemasonry introduced a new environment where religious differences were deliberately set aside. Within the lodge, members of various Christian denominations could gather as equals. In some places, even individuals from non-Christian backgrounds were welcomed. The organization did not ask its members to abandon their personal faith, but it did encourage tolerance and open discussion between people who might otherwise remain separated by religious identity. To many church leaders, this approach created a serious concern. The Catholic tradition emphasized unity of belief under the authority of the Church. Religious truth, according to its doctrine, could not simply be treated as one viewpoint among many. Yet the lodges seemed to operate according to a different principle. They encouraged members to seek truth through discussion and philosophical reflection. Furthermore, the structure of Freemasonry raised additional questions. Members were required to swear oaths of secrecy regarding the rituals and teachings of the lodge. These oaths bound them to protect the organization and their fellow members. From the perspective of church authorities, such promises could conflict with a believer's ultimate loyalty to religious doctrine. What if a lodge discussed ideas that challenged the teachings of the Church? Would members remain silent because of their oath? Could a secret society become a place where beliefs contrary to Christianity were allowed to develop without oversight? These concerns grew stronger as Freemasonry continued to expand. By the 1720s and 1730s, lodges had appeared in cities throughout Europe. Influential individuals joined the movement, including politicians, scholars, and members of royal courts. In certain regions, the lodges also began attracting individuals who were interested in reforming political systems. Ideas about constitutional government, civil liberties, and freedom of thought circulated among intellectual circles of the Enlightenment. Although Freemasonry did not officially promote political revolutions, its environment encouraged conversations that could challenge traditional authority. For the Vatican, the combination of secrecy, philosophical independence, and international connections created an unsettling picture. In 1738, the Church decided to respond. That year, Pope Clement XII issued a papal bull titled In Eminenti Apostolatus Specula. The document represented the first official condemnation of Freemasonry by the Catholic Church. Its language was direct and unmistakable. Catholics were forbidden from joining Masonic lodges. Those who ignored the prohibition would face excommunication, one of the most serious penalties the Church could impose. The reasoning behind the decision reflected the concerns that had been building for years. The papal decree pointed to the secret nature of Masonic gatherings. It warned that organizations operating in secrecy could easily conceal ideas harmful to religious faith. The document also criticized the practice of admitting members from different religions into the same society. To church authorities, this policy suggested that Freemasonry treated religious truth as a matter of personal interpretation rather than divine authority. The Vatican feared that such attitudes could weaken the unity of Christian belief. The papal bull also raised a broader issue. Freemasonry existed as an international network that crossed political boundaries. Members could recognize one another through shared symbols and rituals, regardless of nationality. In a world where religious and political loyalties were deeply intertwined, such connections could be viewed as potentially disruptive. The Church worried that secret alliances might influence political decisions or encourage ideas that undermined established institutions. When the decree was announced, reactions across Europe varied widely. In strongly Catholic regions, authorities often supported the papal order. Governments closed Masonic lodges and discouraged membership. But in other areas, the response was less strict. Some rulers valued the intellectual discussions taking place within the lodges and saw little reason to suppress them. In certain Protestant countries, the papal ban carried little influence at all. As a result, Freemasonry continued to grow despite the condemnation. The conflict between the Vatican and the lodges did not end with a single decree. Over the following decades, additional papal statements reinforced the prohibition. Successive popes repeated the warning that Catholics should avoid membership in Masonic organizations. Yet the Brotherhood persisted. In fact, the controversy sometimes increased public curiosity about the movement. When something is forbidden, people often become more interested in discovering why. Writers and observers began speculating about what truly happened during lodge meetings. Some imagined elaborate rituals filled with ancient symbolism. Others believed the lodges were secretly coordinating political revolutions. Most of these claims were exaggerated, but the atmosphere of mystery surrounding Freemasonry continued to grow. At the same time, the Enlightenment was reshaping the intellectual landscape of Europe. Philosophers questioned traditional sources of authority. Scientific discoveries challenged long-held assumptions about the natural world. Writers argued for new ideas about government, freedom, and the rights of individuals. Many of these discussions took place both inside and outside Masonic lodges. Whether Freemasonry directly influenced these developments or simply reflected the spirit of the time remains a matter of historical debate. What is certain is that the relationship between the Church and secret societies had entered a new phase. In the medieval period, conflicts often centered on religious movements accused of heresy. Now the tension focused on organizations that promoted intellectual independence and operated through private networks. The Vatican had drawn a clear line, but the spread of new ideas could not easily be stopped. Across Europe, another secretive organization would soon emerge that pushed these tensions even further. Unlike Freemasonry, which developed gradually over centuries, this new group appeared suddenly. Its founders had a specific plan, a plan to reshape society itself. Its name would become one of the most famous and controversial in the history of secret societies: the Illuminati. In the late 18th century, Europe stood at the height of the Enlightenment. Across universities, royal courts, and intellectual salons, scholars debated new ideas about reason, science, and the structure of society. Philosophers wrote boldly about liberty and the rights of individuals. Scientific discoveries were challenging long-held assumptions about the universe and humanity's place within it. For many thinkers, the age felt like the beginning of a transformation. The old world of unquestioned authority was being examined with new curiosity. Institutions that had shaped European life for centuries, including monarchies and religious hierarchies, were no longer immune from criticism. Within this atmosphere of intellectual change, a new secret society would emerge. Unlike the Freemasons, whose traditions had developed gradually over centuries, this organization was founded deliberately with a clear ideological purpose. Its creator was a professor from Bavaria. His name was Adam Weishaupt. Weishaupt was born in 1748 in the city of Ingolstadt, located in what is now southern Germany. He grew up during a time when education was expanding and universities were becoming centers for philosophical debate. As a student, he studied law and philosophy, immersing himself in the writings of Enlightenment thinkers. These philosophers promoted the power of reason and argued that human society could improve through knowledge and rational thought. Weishaupt admired these ideas deeply, yet he also felt frustrated by the limitations of the world around him. Bavaria in the 18th century remained strongly influenced by religious authority. The Catholic Church played a powerful role in education and political life. Universities often followed strict traditions that limited the spread of controversial ideas. To Weishaupt, this environment felt restrictive. He believed that intellectual progress required freedom from what he saw as outdated systems of control, but openly challenging those systems could be dangerous. So he began to imagine another approach. Instead of promoting reform publicly, perhaps a network of educated individuals could work quietly behind the scenes. A secret organization could guide society toward what he believed to be a more enlightened future. On May 1, 1776, Weishaupt founded a small society with that goal. He called it the Order of the Illuminati. The name came from the Latin word illuminatus, meaning enlightened. Members of the order believed they were pursuing knowledge and wisdom that could illuminate society. At the beginning, the group was extremely small. Only a few students and colleagues joined the early meetings in Ingolstadt. They gathered discreetly, discussing philosophy, politics, and strategies for expanding their influence. The organization developed a structured system of ranks. New members entered at lower levels where they studied Enlightenment writings and demonstrated loyalty to the group. As they advanced, they gained access to deeper discussions about the order's long-term goals. Weishaupt designed the structure carefully. He wanted the organization to grow gradually, building networks among educated individuals who could influence institutions such as universities, governments, and cultural societies. But recruiting members presented a challenge. Creating a completely new secret society from nothing required time and connections. Then Weishaupt noticed an opportunity: Freemasonry. By the late 18th century, Masonic lodges existed throughout Europe. These lodges already attracted many educated and influential individuals. Their traditions of symbolism and ritual created an atmosphere that felt compatible with the secretive structure Weishaupt envisioned. So the Illuminati began recruiting within Masonic circles. Members who joined the Illuminati often remained part of their local lodges while secretly advancing within the new organization. This strategy allowed the group to expand rapidly. Within a few years, the Illuminati had established cells in several German states. Intellectuals, officials, and young professionals joined the movement, drawn by the promise of participating in a project aimed at reforming society. The order also adopted elaborate systems of secrecy. Members used code names to conceal their identities. Cities were assigned symbolic titles within internal documents. Correspondence between members was sometimes written in coded language. These practices created an atmosphere that felt both intriguing and mysterious. Inside the organization, discussions focused on Enlightenment ideals. Weishaupt believed that many social problems were caused by ignorance and manipulation by powerful institutions. He hoped that educated individuals could gradually guide society toward a more rational and just system. His critics later claimed that the Illuminati aimed to destroy religion and overthrow governments. Supporters argued that the order simply sought intellectual freedom and reform. The truth likely lies somewhere between these interpretations. What is certain is that the group operated in secrecy at a time when secret organizations already attracted suspicion. Meanwhile, Europe itself was becoming increasingly unstable. Economic pressures, political conflicts, and growing demands for reform were creating tensions within many kingdoms. Ideas about liberty and equality were spreading among the educated classes. Within this environment, rumors about the Illuminati began to circulate. Some observers believed the organization was quietly infiltrating institutions in order to spread Enlightenment philosophy. Others suspected far more ambitious goals. Because the order recruited within Freemasonry, critics began claiming that Masonic lodges themselves were secretly controlled by the Illuminati. These accusations alarmed political authorities. In Bavaria, government officials grew concerned that a hidden network might be influencing universities and civil administration. Investigations began. In 1784, the Bavarian government issued a decree banning all secret societies that had not received official approval. The Illuminati quickly became a primary target. Authorities raided the homes of suspected members and confiscated documents belonging to the organization. What they found intensified the controversy. Among the seized papers were letters discussing strategies for spreading Enlightenment ideas and expanding the order's influence. Although many of these writings reflected philosophical ambitions rather than violent plans, the language of secrecy and reform appeared threatening to conservative authorities. The government moved swiftly. In 1785, the Bavarian ruler officially outlawed the Illuminati. Membership in the order became illegal. Key leaders were dismissed from academic positions or forced to flee. Adam Weishaupt himself lost his post at the University of Ingolstadt and eventually went into exile. Within a few years, the organization that had once hoped to reshape society seemed to vanish. But the story did not end there. The discovery of secret documents and coded correspondence captured the imagination of Europe. Writers began publishing books and pamphlets describing the Illuminati and speculating about their goals. Some authors portrayed the order as a dangerous conspiracy working to undermine religion and political stability. Others dismissed the group as a short-lived philosophical experiment exaggerated by frightened authorities. Yet once again, secrecy had created a powerful legend. Even though the organization had been officially dissolved, many people believed that its members continued operating quietly. Perhaps they had simply moved deeper underground. Perhaps they had infiltrated other societies. Perhaps their ideas had spread further than anyone realized. In the years that followed, these suspicions would grow even stronger. Because only a few years after the Illuminati were banned, Europe would experience one of the most dramatic political upheavals in its history. A revolution that would shake the foundations of monarchy, challenge the authority of the Church, and transform the course of the modern world. And soon, some observers would claim that the hidden hand of the Illuminati had played a role in the events that followed. The French Revolution. By the late 1780s, the Order of the Illuminati had officially disappeared from public life. Government decrees in Bavaria had banned the society. Its documents had been seized. Its founder, Adam Weishaupt, had lost his academic position and retreated into exile. Members of the order had scattered across different regions, many quietly abandoning the organization to avoid punishment. On paper, the experiment had ended. A small secret society founded by a university professor had briefly expanded, attracted attention, and then collapsed under political pressure. Yet something unusual began to happen in the years that followed. Instead of fading from memory, the Illuminati grew more famous. Part of the reason lay in the documents that Bavarian authorities had confiscated during their investigation. Letters between members revealed a carefully structured organization with ambitions that reached beyond simple philosophical discussion. The writings described plans to influence education, guide political ideas, and gradually reshape society through networks of enlightened individuals. Although these goals reflected the language of Enlightenment philosophy rather than open rebellion, the secrecy surrounding them created a powerful impression. When extracts from the seized papers were published, readers across Europe reacted with fascination and alarm. To some observers, the Illuminati seemed like proof that hidden forces were operating behind the scenes of society. Others dismissed the order as an overblown intellectual club whose ambitions had never come close to reality. But once the idea of a secret network seeking to reshape the world entered public imagination, it proved impossible to erase. Then, history took a dramatic turn. In 1789, only a few years after the Illuminati had been outlawed, revolution erupted in France. The French Revolution would become one of the most transformative events in modern history. It challenged the authority of monarchy, dismantled long-standing social hierarchies, and eventually led to the execution of King Louis XVI. The upheaval shocked Europe. For centuries, kings had ruled through systems that seemed stable and permanent. Suddenly, those systems were collapsing under the pressure of popular unrest. Crowds filled the streets of Paris. Ancient institutions were dismantled, and the Catholic Church itself became one of the targets of revolutionary change. Church lands were confiscated. Clergy were forced to swear loyalty to the new revolutionary government. Religious symbols were removed from public life as radical leaders attempted to reshape society according to new ideals. For many conservative observers, the events felt terrifying. How could such a dramatic upheaval occur so quickly? Why had centuries of political and religious authority suddenly collapsed? In times of uncertainty, people often search for explanations that make complex events easier to understand. And soon, some writers began suggesting a startling possibility. Perhaps the French Revolution had not been entirely spontaneous. Perhaps it had been planned. In 1797, a French priest named Augustin Baruel published a series of books examining the causes of the revolution. Baruel believed that the upheaval was the result of a long conspiracy involving secret societies. According to his interpretation, the Enlightenment philosophers had first challenged traditional religious beliefs. Freemasonry had then provided networks where these ideas could spread among influential individuals. And finally, the Illuminati had organized these forces into a coordinated effort to overthrow monarchy and the Church. Baruel's books attracted enormous attention. His theory offered a clear explanation for events that had otherwise seemed chaotic and unpredictable. Many readers found the idea compelling. Another writer, the Scottish scholar John Robison, published a similar argument in his own book. Robison had once been a Freemason himself, and he warned that secret societies might be working together to destabilize European institutions. The combination of these publications created a powerful narrative. According to this interpretation, the Illuminati had not truly disappeared after their ban in Bavaria. Instead, they had gone underground. Their members had infiltrated Masonic lodges and intellectual circles, spreading revolutionary ideas until the moment was right for dramatic political change. Modern historians generally view these claims with skepticism. While revolutionary leaders were certainly influenced by Enlightenment philosophy, there is little evidence that the Illuminati orchestrated the events of 1789. The French Revolution had many complex causes, including economic crisis, social inequality, and political mismanagement. Yet the conspiracy theory proved remarkably resilient. Once people began imagining a hidden organization guiding world events, the idea became difficult to dismiss. Secret societies already possessed an aura of mystery. Their private rituals, coded symbols, and hidden membership lists encouraged speculation. And the Illuminati, with their dramatic name and secretive structure, provided the perfect symbol for fears about invisible power. As the 19th century progressed, the legend continued to grow. Writers and pamphleteers across Europe and America repeated the claim that the Illuminati still existed. Some believed they were manipulating governments. Others claimed they were secretly directing revolutions. Occasionally, the theories expanded even further, suggesting that the order aimed to create a global system of control over politics and religion. In these stories, the Vatican often appeared as one of the primary obstacles. For centuries, the Catholic Church had served as one of the most powerful institutions in Europe. Any movement seeking to reshape society would inevitably confront its influence. Whether the Illuminati ever intended such a confrontation remains uncertain, but the idea that a hidden organization might be working to undermine the authority of the Church fascinated many readers. Meanwhile, Freemasonry continued to grow throughout the 19th century. Masonic lodges spread across Europe, North America, and eventually other parts of the world. Many respected public figures became members, including politicians, scientists, and writers. To supporters, the Brotherhood represented ideals of fraternity, charity, and intellectual development. But to critics, the expanding network of lodges seemed to confirm suspicions that secret societies held too much influence. Because Freemasonry allowed members from different religious and political backgrounds to gather privately, rumors about hidden agendas persisted. In Catholic countries especially, the Church remained deeply concerned about the role of Masonic organizations. Popes continued issuing statements condemning membership in secret societies. Church authorities warned that groups promoting philosophical independence could weaken religious authority and moral tradition. The conflict between the Vatican and these brotherhoods did not always take the form of direct confrontation. Often, it unfolded through speeches, writings, and ideological debates. Yet the tension remained visible. As the 19th century advanced, new political movements emerged that openly challenged the traditional power of monarchies and churches. Nationalism, liberalism, and revolutionary ideologies spread across the continent. Some of these movements included individuals who were also members of secret societies. This overlap strengthened the belief among critics that hidden networks were shaping political change. Whether those suspicions were accurate or exaggerated remained difficult to determine. But one thing was clear: the disappearance of the Illuminati had not ended the story. Instead, it had created one of the most enduring legends in the history of secret societies. a legend suggesting that powerful organizations might operate quietly behind the visible structures of government and religion. And as Europe entered the turbulent decades of the 19th century, the relationship between the Vatican and these mysterious networks would grow even more complicated. Because secret societies were about to play roles in revolutions, national unifications, and political struggles that would reshape the continent once again. As the 19th century began, Europe entered a period of profound transformation. The old political structures that had dominated the continent for centuries were beginning to crack under growing pressure. Monarchies that once seemed permanent now faced waves of reform movements, revolutions, and rising nationalist ambitions. Across cities and universities, people debated new visions of society. Some believed that power should no longer belong exclusively to kings and aristocrats. Others argued that citizens deserved representation and individual rights. Philosophers wrote about liberty and equality. Newspapers spread political ideas faster than ever before. This new climate created opportunities for organizations that operated through private networks. Secret societies became increasingly visible in the political landscape of the 19th century. Unlike earlier religious movements that openly challenged church doctrine, many of these groups focused on political reform and national independence. They often used secrecy for practical reasons. In countries where governments restricted political discussion, private meetings offered a safer environment for organizing movements that could otherwise be suppressed. One of the most influential examples appeared in Italy. At the beginning of the 19th century, the Italian peninsula was not a unified nation. Instead, it was divided into numerous kingdoms, duchies, and territories. Some regions were ruled by foreign powers, such as Austria, while others remained under local monarchs. Among these territories stood the Papal States. For centuries, the Pope had governed a large region of central Italy not only as a spiritual leader, but also as a political ruler. This meant that the Vatican exercised both religious and governmental authority over millions of people. But as nationalist ideas spread through Europe, many Italians began imagining a different future. They dreamed of a single unified Italian nation. And among the organizations that promoted this vision was a secret society known as the Carbonari. The name Carbonari roughly translated to charcoal burners, a reference to rural workers who produced charcoal in forest regions. The symbolism reflected the secretive nature of the group. Members gathered in hidden meetings and used coded language to discuss their plans. The Carbonari appeared during the early 19th century and quickly attracted supporters who opposed authoritarian rule in parts of Italy. Their members included soldiers, intellectuals, and political activists who believed their country should be free from foreign control and divided monarchies. Like many secret societies, the Carbonari developed elaborate rituals. New members were initiated through ceremonies that included symbolic objects and oaths of loyalty. The rituals were designed to create unity within the brotherhood and ensure that members remained committed to the organization. The use of secrecy allowed the group to operate even when governments attempted to suppress political dissent. But secrecy also created suspicion. Authorities feared that hidden networks might coordinate revolutions or violent uprisings. These fears were not entirely unfounded. During the early decades of the 19th century, the Carbonari played roles in several revolutionary attempts. In 1820 and 1821, uprisings inspired by the society erupted in parts of Italy and Spain. Although many of these revolts were eventually suppressed by government forces, they demonstrated how organized networks could mobilize political action. For the Vatican, the rise of such movements presented a complicated challenge. The Catholic Church remained one of the most influential institutions in Europe, but its political authority in Italy was increasingly contested. Nationalist reformers believed that the Papal States stood in the way of unifying the Italian peninsula under a single modern nation. Some revolutionary leaders openly criticized the political power of the Church. At the same time, many members of these movements remained practicing Catholics. This created a tension between religious identity and political ambition. Secret societies provided a space where these contradictions could exist. Within the private meetings of organizations like the Carbonari, members could debate political change without directly confronting religious belief. But the Vatican could not ignore the growing influence of such groups. Church authorities worried that secret societies encouraged ideas that threatened both spiritual and political stability. Papal documents continued warning Catholics against joining organizations that required secret oaths. The concern was not only about theology, it was also about authority. If individuals pledged loyalty to private brotherhoods with hidden agendas, the Church feared that those loyalties might conflict with obedience to religious teachings. As revolutionary movements spread across Europe, the relationship between secret societies and political change became even more visible. The year 1848 would mark one of the most dramatic moments in this turbulent era. Across the continent, revolutions erupted almost simultaneously. In France, a monarchy collapsed and was replaced by a republic. In the German states, citizens demanded constitutional reforms. In the Austrian Empire, uprisings challenged imperial authority. And in Italy, nationalist leaders attempted once again to unite the peninsula. Although these revolutions were driven by complex social and economic forces, secret societies often played roles in organizing activists and spreading ideas. Their networks allowed information to travel quickly between cities. Their rituals created bonds of loyalty among members who risked imprisonment or exile for their political beliefs. Some revolutionaries became famous figures in the struggle for national independence. One of the most influential was Giuseppe Mazzini. Mazzini was a passionate advocate for Italian unification. He believed that Italy should become a democratic republic guided by the will of its citizens. To promote this vision, he founded another secret organization known as Young Italy. The movement aimed to inspire patriotic feeling and mobilize young activists across the peninsula. Like the Carbonari before it, Young Italy relied on secret meetings and coded communications. Its members pledged themselves to the cause of national unity and political reform. For the Vatican, these developments created a difficult position. On one hand, many Catholics supported the dream of a unified Italy. On the other hand, the success of nationalist movements threatened the existence of the Papal States. If Italy became a single nation governed by a central authority, the Pope might lose his temporal power over large territories. The conflict between these visions gradually intensified. Throughout the 19th century, waves of political change reshaped the Italian peninsula. Kingdoms were reorganized, alliances shifted, military campaigns altered the balance of power. Finally, in 1870, the forces of the Kingdom of Italy captured the city of Rome. The Papal States effectively ceased to exist as an independent political territory. For the Vatican, the loss of temporal power marked the end of an era that had lasted more than 1,000 years. The Pope remained the spiritual leader of the Catholic Church, but his direct political authority over central Italy had been dramatically reduced. Many observers believed that secret societies had played significant roles in the nationalist movements that led to this transformation. Whether their influence was decisive or simply part of broader historical forces remains a subject of debate among historians. Yet the perception of hidden networks guiding political change continued to spread. To critics of secret societies, the events of the 19th century seemed to confirm long-standing fears. Organizations operating in secrecy could influence revolutions, shape political movements, and challenge the authority of powerful institutions, including the Vatican itself. And as the modern world continued to develop, new chapters in this long story were about to unfold. The 20th century would bring global wars, ideological struggles, and technological revolutions unlike anything humanity had experienced before. Within that rapidly changing world, the legends surrounding secret societies would grow even more dramatic. And the Vatican would once again find itself navigating a complex relationship with organizations that preferred to operate in the shadows. By the late 19th century, the relationship between the Vatican and secret societies had become one of the most persistent tensions in European intellectual and political life. For centuries, the Catholic Church had viewed organizations bound by secret oaths with suspicion. The concern was not only theological, but also practical. The Church believed that a Catholic's primary loyalty must remain with faith and moral authority. If members pledged obedience to hidden brotherhoods whose purposes were not fully known, that loyalty could become divided. Among the organizations that attracted the greatest attention were the Masonic lodges. Freemasonry had spread widely across Europe and the Americas during the 18th and 19th centuries. Lodges existed in major cities, provincial towns, and colonial territories. Their membership included merchants, soldiers, scholars, and political leaders. The fraternity promoted ideals such as brotherhood, moral development, charity, and philosophical reflection. Within lodge meetings, members discussed ethical principles using symbolic language drawn from ancient architecture and stonemasonry. Ritual ceremonies and allegorical teachings were used to illustrate ideas about self-improvement and enlightenment. Supporters of Freemasonry argued that these traditions encouraged tolerance and intellectual curiosity. But critics often interpreted the secrecy surrounding lodge activities very differently. To them, hidden rituals and private networks suggested the possibility of coordinated influence behind public institutions. The Vatican watched these developments carefully. Popes had already issued several statements warning Catholics about joining secret societies. Yet, as the 19th century progressed, Freemasonry continued to expand in influence and visibility. Many of its members held positions within governments, military organizations, and cultural institutions. The growth of nationalist movements and liberal political philosophies during this period often overlapped with Masonic membership. Although Freemasonry itself did not represent a single political ideology, some lodges supported reforms that limited the authority of traditional religious institutions. This overlap deepened the Church's concerns. In 1884, Pope Leo XIII issued one of the most significant documents addressing the issue. The encyclical was titled Humanum Genus. In this letter, the Pope described a philosophical conflict between two visions of society. One vision, according to the document, placed its foundation in Christian teachings and divine authority. The other emphasized human reason as the ultimate guide for shaping political and social systems. The encyclical argued that certain secret societies promoted ideas that could weaken religious belief and moral order. Freemasonry received particular attention in the document. The Pope warned Catholics that joining such organizations could expose them to influences that conflicted with Church doctrine. From the Vatican's perspective, the concern was not simply about rituals or private meetings. It was about the broader philosophical direction of society. If influential networks encouraged secular ideas that removed religion from public life, the Church feared that moral guidance might gradually disappear from political decision-making. The encyclical Humanum Genus was widely circulated. In Catholic communities around the world, clergy discussed its message and reminded believers of the Church's position regarding secret societies. Yet the response outside the Church was mixed. Freemasons and their supporters often rejected the accusations, arguing that the fraternity promoted ethical behavior and charitable work rather than hostility toward religion. Many Masonic lodges included members who considered themselves religious individuals. In some countries, Catholics continued joining lodges despite official warnings. The debate soon expanded beyond theology into politics. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, governments across Europe experienced growing tension between secular authorities and religious institutions. Some political leaders believed that the state should operate independently from church influence. Educational systems, legal structures, and civil administrations increasingly adopted secular principles. In several countries, Masonic organizations became associated with movements that supported these reforms. This association reinforced the Vatican's belief that secret societies played a role in reshaping society in ways that might marginalize religious authority. At the same time, many historians caution against viewing Freemasonry as a unified political force. The fraternity functioned more like a network of independent lodges, rather than a centralized organization controlling a global agenda. Different lodges often reflected the cultural and political environment of their own regions. Some focused primarily on charity and social fellowship. Others participated more actively in political discussions. Yet, because lodge meetings remained private and rituals were not publicly explained, the aura of secrecy continued fueling speculation. The relationship between the Vatican and Freemasonry therefore evolved into a complex mixture of ideological disagreement, political tension, and mutual suspicion. Meanwhile, the 20th century approached with new challenges that neither institution could have fully predicted. Industrialization was transforming economies. Cities were expanding rapidly. New technologies were changing communication, transportation, and warfare. Political ideologies such as socialism, nationalism, and fascism were gaining followers across the continent. These movements would soon trigger global conflicts that reshaped the entire structure of international society. During the First World War, many traditional institutions struggled to adapt to the unprecedented scale of destruction and political upheaval. Empires collapsed, new nations emerged, and the authority of old systems faced serious questioning. Within this changing world, both the Vatican and secret societies had to reconsider their roles. For the Church, maintaining moral leadership in a rapidly secularizing society required new strategies. For organizations like Freemasonry, the challenge involved preserving traditions while navigating increasingly complex political environments. Yet, despite the dramatic changes of the modern age, the fascination with hidden networks did not disappear. In fact, the chaos of the 20th century often intensified public curiosity about secret organizations. Whenever dramatic historical events occurred, people sometimes wondered whether invisible influences might be operating behind the scenes. The Illuminati legend, which had begun decades earlier, continued appearing in books and public discussions. Freemasonry remained the subject of both admiration and criticism. And the Vatican, as one of the oldest surviving institutions in Western civilization, continued interacting with these narratives in ways that were sometimes subtle and sometimes direct. By the middle of the 20th century, another unexpected chapter in the story of secret societies and the Vatican would emerge. It would involve financial institutions, political scandals, and a mysterious organization that operated quietly within the complex landscape of modern Italy. An organization whose name would eventually become known around the world. The lodge called P2. By the middle of the 20th century, Europe had changed in ways that earlier generations could hardly have imagined. Two devastating world wars had reshaped political borders and destroyed entire empires. New governments had emerged, old monarchies had fallen, and the global balance of power had shifted dramatically. Italy itself had experienced extraordinary upheaval. After the fall of fascism during the Second World War, the country rebuilt its political system as a republic. New democratic institutions were created, and Italy began integrating into the broader political and economic structures of Western Europe. Yet, beneath the surface of this rebuilding process, complex networks of influence continued to operate. Business leaders, political figures, intelligence agencies, and private organizations all competed for power within the evolving Italian state. Within this complicated environment, an unusual Masonic lodge slowly gained attention. Its name was Propaganda Due, more commonly known as P2. At first glance, P2 appeared to be simply another lodge connected to the broader Masonic tradition in Italy. Freemasonry had existed in the country for centuries, and numerous lodges operated across different cities. But P2 functioned very differently from most Masonic organizations. Rather than focusing on philosophical discussions or symbolic rituals, the lodge gradually transformed into something far more secretive and politically connected. The man most closely associated with its rise was Licio Gelli. Gelli was a businessman with a complicated past. During the years of fascist rule in Italy, he had been involved in political networks connected to the regime of Benito Mussolini. After the war, as Italy entered a new democratic era, Gelli managed to rebuild his influence in business and political circles. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, he had become the central figure behind the P2 Lodge. Under his leadership, P2 began recruiting members who held powerful positions in Italian society. Politicians joined the lodge, military officers joined, journalists, bankers, and intelligence officials also appeared on its membership lists. Unlike traditional Masonic lodges that often operated openly within their communities, P2 functioned with extraordinary secrecy. Even within the broader Masonic system, many leaders were unaware of the full extent of the lodge's activities. Its membership lists were hidden, meetings were conducted privately, and the goals of the organization were rarely discussed outside a small circle of trusted insiders. Over time, rumors began circulating about the lodge's influence. Some observers believed that P2 was quietly building a network capable of shaping political decisions behind the scenes. Others suspected that the organization sought to manipulate media coverage, financial institutions, and government policies. The secrecy surrounding the lodge made it difficult to separate fact from speculation, but one thing became increasingly clear. The membership of P2 included individuals connected to many of the most important institutions in Italy. During the 1970s, Italy faced a period of intense political instability. Terrorist attacks, ideological conflicts, and economic uncertainty created what historians often describe as the years of lead. Violence erupted between extremist groups on both the far left and the far right. Bombings, kidnappings, and assassinations shocked the nation. In such an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty, rumors about hidden networks gained enormous attention. People began asking whether secret organizations might be influencing the direction of the country. The name P2 appeared more frequently in whispered conversations and investigative reports. But the true scale of the lodge remained unknown. Then, in 1981, a dramatic discovery changed everything. Italian authorities were conducting an investigation related to financial crimes involving the Banco Ambrosiano, one of the country's major private banks. During a search of Licio Gelli's residence, investigators uncovered documents that would shock the nation. Among them was a list containing the names of nearly 1,000 individuals connected to the P2 Lodge. The list included high-ranking military officers, members of parliament, government ministers, intelligence officials, media executives, and prominent businessmen. Suddenly, the idea that a secret organization had infiltrated many of Italy's most powerful institutions no longer seemed like speculation. It appeared to be documented reality. The revelation created a massive political scandal. Parliament launched investigations. Newspapers across Europe and the United States reported on the mysterious lodge and its hidden network. The Italian government eventually moved to dissolve P2 and declared the organization illegal. But the controversy did not end there. Investigators discovered additional documents suggesting that the lodge had developed plans for reorganizing the Italian political system. One proposal described a strategy for increasing executive power, influencing media coverage, and reshaping public institutions. Supporters of the investigation argued that P2 had attempted to build a shadow structure capable of guiding the country behind the scenes. Others claimed that the documents represented theoretical discussions rather than concrete plans. The truth remains debated among historians and political analysts, but the scandal raised profound questions about the role of secret organizations in modern political life. And within this complex story, the Vatican appeared indirectly connected to one of the most dramatic financial crises of the era. Banco Ambrosiano, the bank involved in the original investigation, maintained financial relationships with the Vatican Bank, formerly known as the Institute for the Works of Religion. When Banco Ambrosiano collapsed in 1982 under the weight of massive debts and financial irregularities, the crisis attracted international attention. The chairman of the bank, Roberto Calvi, was later found dead in London under mysterious circumstances. Newspapers quickly began speculating about connections between the bank, the P2 Lodge, international finance, and the Vatican. Some reports suggested that complex financial transactions had linked these institutions together in ways that were difficult to trace. The Vatican itself denied involvement in any illegal activities and eventually contributed funds to help resolve disputes with creditors. Even so, the scandal reinforced the perception that powerful networks sometimes overlapped in unexpected ways. Politics, finance, religion, and secret organizations appeared to intersect within a complicated web of influence. For the public, the story felt almost like a modern version of the ancient mysteries surrounding secret societies. Once again, hidden membership lists, coded communications, and private alliances had surfaced in the heart of European power. And once again, the Vatican found itself connected to a story that captured the world's imagination. Yet the events surrounding P2 also revealed something important about the modern era. Secret societies no longer operated only in candlelit lodges or medieval fortresses. They existed within the complex institutions of contemporary society. Banks, corporations, governments, and intelligence agencies had become the new arenas where influence and secrecy could intersect. And as the 20th century moved toward its final decades, the fascination with hidden organizations would only continue to grow. Because even after the P2 scandal faded from headlines, the legend of secret societies confronting powerful institutions remained firmly embedded in the public imagination. A legend that had begun centuries earlier, and one that still had a few chapters left to tell. By the late 20th century, the world had entered a new era of information. Television, global media networks, and eventually the Internet allowed ideas to spread faster than at any time in human history. News traveled across continents within hours. Historical documents became accessible to wider audiences. Scholars published research that re-examined centuries of political and religious history. But alongside this expansion of knowledge, another phenomenon also grew rapidly: conspiracy theories. Stories about hidden organizations influencing world events began circulating through books, documentaries, and later through online forums and digital media. Many of these narratives drew inspiration from the long history of secret societies that had once operated across Europe: the Knights Templar, the Freemasons, the Illuminati. Each of these names carried an aura of mystery shaped by centuries of rumors, investigations, and speculation. Because these organizations had used secrecy in their rituals and communications, the gaps in historical knowledge allowed imagination to fill the empty spaces. Writers began proposing elaborate theories suggesting that ancient secret societies had never truly disappeared. According to some of these ideas, hidden networks of influence had survived through generations, quietly shaping political and economic systems around the world. In many of these stories, the Vatican appeared as a central figure. Sometimes it was portrayed as a powerful institution attempting to suppress secret knowledge. At other times, it was described as one participant within a much larger network of global influence. The popularity of these theories reflected a broader cultural fascination with hidden power. During the Cold War, Intelligence agencies operated in secrecy across both Western and Eastern political systems. Governments conducted covert operations that were sometimes revealed years later through investigative journalism. These real examples of hidden political activity made the public more receptive to the idea that secret networks might exist behind the scenes of global events. At the same time, popular culture began exploring these themes in novels and films. Stories involving ancient codes, lost religious artifacts, and secret brotherhoods attracted millions of readers. One of the most influential examples appeared in the early 21st century with the publication of the novel The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. The book presented a fictional story involving hidden religious secrets, mysterious symbols, and ancient organizations connected to the history of Christianity. Within its narrative, the Knights Templar and other secret groups played important roles in protecting knowledge that challenged traditional interpretations of church history. The novel became an international bestseller. Millions of readers became fascinated by the idea that forgotten societies might still guard ancient secrets related to the origins of Christianity. Historians quickly pointed out that many elements of the story were fictional or loosely inspired by historical events, rather than supported by evidence. Yet the popularity of the book demonstrated how strongly the theme of secret organizations had captured public imagination. For the Vatican, this cultural fascination created both challenges and opportunities. Church historians responded by publishing explanations that clarified the difference between historical research and fictional storytelling. Scholars emphasized that while secret societies had certainly existed, many modern conspiracy theories relied on speculation rather than documented facts. At the same time, the Church recognized that public curiosity about history could encourage deeper interest in the past. Museums, archives, and academic institutions connected to the Vatican continued making historical materials available to researchers. Over time, more scholars gained access to documents that revealed new details about medieval politics, religious debates, and the complex relationship between the Church and various organizations throughout history. These discoveries often showed that the real story was more complicated than either conspiracy theories or official narratives alone. Powerful institutions sometimes cooperated. At other times, they competed fiercely for influence. Kings negotiated with popes. Merchants financed religious orders. Scholars debated philosophy in universities, where political authority and spiritual tradition often intersected. Secret societies existed within this landscape, but they rarely controlled events in the absolute way that conspiracy stories suggested. Instead, they functioned as networks of individuals responding to the political and cultural challenges of their time. Still, the mystery surrounding these organizations never completely disappeared. Part of the reason lies in human psychology. People are naturally curious about hidden knowledge. The idea that powerful secrets might exist somewhere beyond ordinary understanding has fascinated humanity for centuries. Ancient myths spoke of lost libraries and sacred texts known only to a few initiates. Medieval legends described hidden relics guarded by secret orders. Modern conspiracy theories simply continued this tradition, using the language of contemporary politics and global power. For the Vatican, maintaining transparency while preserving the privacy of its internal institutions has always been a delicate balance. Like any major organization, the Church operates through archives, administrative offices, and diplomatic relationships that require confidentiality. Yet those same layers of complexity can sometimes appear mysterious to outside observers. And whenever information remains incomplete, speculation tends to grow. The result is a cultural landscape where history and legend often blend together. In documentaries, novels, and online discussions, secret societies continue appearing as characters in a story that stretches across centuries. Some narratives portray them as heroic guardians of forgotten wisdom. Others describe them as hidden powers attempting to control world events. Between these extremes lies the quieter reality studied by historians. A reality where individuals formed organizations to pursue ideas, protect influence, or simply share philosophical traditions. Some of these organizations survived for generations, others disappeared quickly under political pressure. Yet all of them contributed pieces to a much larger historical puzzle. As the 21st century continues, new technologies are transforming how people explore the past. Digital archives allow researchers to examine documents once locked inside distant libraries. Artificial intelligence can analyze historical texts in ways that earlier scholars could not imagine. With each new discovery, historians gain clearer insights into the complicated relationships between institutions like the Vatican and the many organizations that interacted with it throughout history. And yet, even as evidence becomes more accessible, the legends remain. Because mystery has always been part of the story. A story that began with medieval knights and secret oaths. A story that moved through Enlightenment philosophers and revolutionary movements. A story that reached modern politics, financial scandals, and global speculation. Now, after centuries of intrigue, only one final question remains. What can this long history of secret societies and powerful institutions truly teach us about the nature of influence, belief, and human curiosity? The answer lies in the final chapter of the story. As the modern world continues to evolve, the relationship between powerful institutions and secret organizations remains a subject of enduring fascination. For centuries, people have asked the same question in many different forms. Who truly shapes the course of history? Is it the visible leaders whose names appear in official records and public speeches? Or are there quieter networks working behind the scenes, guiding events through influence rather than authority? The long story of the Vatican and the secret societies that have surrounded it offers a unique window into this question. Because across nearly 1,000 years of European history, these encounters reveal a complex pattern that cannot be reduced to simple explanations. Some secret organizations genuinely challenged the authority of the Church. Others simply developed alongside it as parallel networks of influence. Still others were transformed by rumor into something far larger than they had ever been in reality. To understand this story, it helps to step back and consider the nature of power itself. Institutions like the Vatican represent one form of influence. They operate through tradition, belief, and visible structures of authority. For the Catholic Church, this authority developed gradually over centuries. Religious teachings shaped the moral frameworks of entire societies. Monarchs sought legitimacy through papal recognition. Cultural traditions intertwined with religious institutions in ways that affected nearly every aspect of daily life. Such influence does not rely solely on political control. It emerges from shared beliefs that millions of people accept as meaningful and true. Secret societies, by contrast, represent a different kind of influence. They operate through private networks rather than public authority. Their power, when it exists, comes from relationships between individuals who share goals, philosophies, or ambitions. Because these organizations function away from public visibility, they often appear mysterious or threatening to outside observers. Yet secrecy itself does not automatically create power. Many secret societies throughout history remained small circles of discussion that left little lasting impact on the broader world. Others grew large enough to influence political or cultural movements. The Knights Templar once possessed enormous wealth and military strength, yet their sudden suppression demonstrated how quickly power can vanish when political alliances shift. The Illuminati sought to shape society through philosophical influence, but their existence lasted only a few years before government authorities dissolved the organization. The Carbonari and similar revolutionary networks helped inspire nationalist movements, but they operated within much larger social forces that ultimately determined the success or failure of political revolutions. Even the P2 Lodge of the 20th century, despite its remarkable network of influential members, eventually collapsed under the weight of public investigation and legal scrutiny. Each of these examples illustrates an important historical pattern. Power rarely belongs entirely to a single institution or secret network. Instead, influence moves constantly through complex relationships between governments, religions, financial systems, intellectual movements, and cultural traditions. The Vatican itself has experienced this dynamic repeatedly. At times, the Church has stood at the center of European authority, guiding the moral and political direction of entire kingdoms. At other times, it has faced opposition from reform movements, revolutionary governments, or secular institutions seeking to redefine society. Throughout these shifts, the Vatican adapted. It negotiated with monarchs. It engaged with new intellectual ideas. It redefined its role within changing political environments. Second societies often emerged during moments when traditional structures appeared uncertain. When people felt that existing systems could not address new challenges, they sometimes formed private networks to pursue alternative visions of the future. This pattern explains why many secret organizations appeared during periods of rapid change. The Enlightenment challenged old philosophical assumptions. Nationalist movements reshaped political borders. Industrialization transformed economies and social hierarchies. In each of these moments, groups of individuals gathered privately to discuss how society might evolve. Some of those gatherings eventually became legendary secret societies. Yet the legends themselves often reveal more about human curiosity than about hidden power. The idea that unseen forces control the world offers a dramatic explanation for events that might otherwise appear chaotic or unpredictable. When history feels confusing, people naturally search for hidden patterns. Secret societies provide a convenient symbol for that search. But historians who examine original documents and detailed evidence often discover a far more complicated reality. Human history is rarely guided by a single hidden plan. It emerges from countless decisions made by individuals responding to the circumstances of their time. Kings and popes, merchants and soldiers, scholars and revolutionaries, and occasionally members of secret organizations who believed they could influence the future. The story of the Vatican and the secret societies that once confronted it therefore becomes less about conspiracies and more about the changing nature of authority. It shows how institutions evolve, how ideas spread, and how people seek meaning in the forces that shape their world. For centuries, the Vatican represented one of the most enduring centers of spiritual influence. Secret societies, meanwhile, affected humanity's recurring desire to explore ideas outside official structures. Sometimes those two worlds collided. Sometimes they coexisted uneasily. And sometimes they influenced each other in ways that historians are still discovering today. As we approach the final chapter of this story, one final theme becomes clear. The mystery surrounding secret societies may never completely disappear, because mystery itself has always been part of human history. From ancient temples to medieval monasteries, from candlelit lodges to modern intelligence agencies, people have always formed circles of trust where knowledge and influence are shared quietly among a few. The Vatican has witnessed many of these circles rise and fall over the centuries. Some left only faint traces in historical records. Others became legends repeated for generations. But all of them remind us that history is not only written in official proclamations and public ceremonies, it is also shaped in private conversations, hidden alliances, and ideas exchanged in rooms that the wider world may never see. And with that realization, the long journey through this history reaches its final stage. A stage where we reflect on what these centuries of secrecy, faith, conflict, and curiosity ultimately reveal about the world we live in today. When we look back across the long arc of history, the story of secret societies and the Vatican reveals something deeper than a series of dramatic confrontations. It reveals a pattern that appears again and again in human civilization. Whenever institutions grow powerful enough to shape the lives of millions, other groups inevitably emerge that question, challenge, or attempt to influence that power. Sometimes those groups act openly. At other times, they prefer to work quietly in private circles, sharing ideas and forming alliances away from public attention. The Vatican, as one of the oldest continuous institutions in the Western world, has stood at the center of this pattern for centuries. From the medieval period to the modern age, it has encountered philosophers, reformers, political leaders, and secret organizations that approached the world from very different perspectives. Some of those encounters led to cooperation. Others produced tension and suspicion. And a few became legendary conflicts remembered long after the original participants disappeared from history. The Knights Templar once represented one of the most powerful military and financial networks of the medieval world. Their dramatic rise and sudden downfall created one of the earliest examples of how quickly influence can change when political circumstances shift. In later centuries, organizations such as the Freemasons developed traditions that emphasized fraternity, symbolism, and philosophical reflection. Their private rituals inspired both admiration and concern among those who wondered what ideas might be discussed behind closed doors. The Illuminati appeared briefly during the Enlightenment, a moment when Europe was questioning ancient structures of authority and exploring new visions of reason and progress. Although the order itself existed for only a short time, its name became one of the most enduring symbols of hidden power in modern culture. In Italy, revolutionary networks such as the Carbonari and later political movements helped reshape the political map of the peninsula. Their actions contributed to the end of the Papal States and the creation of a unified Italian nation. Even in the 20th century, the P2 Lodge demonstrated that secretive networks could still form within modern political systems, raising questions about the relationship between influence, transparency, and democracy. Across all of these episodes, the Vatican responded in different ways. At times, it confronted organizations directly, issuing condemnations or warnings to believers. At other moments, it adapted to changing political realities, redefining its role within societies that were becoming more secular and diverse. This ability to endure across centuries may be one of the most remarkable aspects of the Church's history. Empires have risen and fallen. Political ideologies have appeared, dominated entire regions, and eventually faded. Technologies have transformed the way people communicate, travel, and understand the world. Yet the Vatican remains a visible institution whose archives still contain documents written nearly 1,000 years ago. Within those archives lies a record of countless interactions between the Church and the many groups that have attempted to influence the direction of history. Some of those groups left behind detailed records that historians can study today. Others disappeared so completely that only fragments of their existence remain in scattered references. And in those gaps between the known and the unknown, legends continue to grow. The fascination with secret societies has never truly faded. In fact, the modern age has given these stories new life. Digital media allows ancient myths and historical speculation to circulate across the globe within seconds. Books, films, and online discussions regularly revisit the mysteries surrounding organizations like the Knights Templar or the Illuminati. For many people, these stories provide a sense of intrigue that transforms history into something almost mythical. But the real lesson hidden within these centuries of secrecy may be simpler and more profound. Human beings have always formed communities based on shared beliefs and common goals. Sometimes those communities operate in the open. Sometimes they gather quietly, away from the attention of the wider world. Both forms have shaped the development of civilization. The Vatican itself began as a small community of believers within the Roman Empire. Over generations, it grew into a global institution that continues influencing religious thought and humanitarian efforts across many cultures. Secret societies, in their own way, reflect the same human impulse to gather with others who share ideas about how the world should work. The difference lies in how those ideas interact with the structures of power surrounding them. When secrecy meets authority, tension often follows. Questions arise about loyalty, influence, and the boundaries between private discussion and public responsibility. Those questions have appeared repeatedly throughout the encounters between the Vatican and various secret organizations, and they remain relevant today in a world where information travels instantly, but true understanding can still be difficult to achieve. In the end, the long history of secret societies confronting the Vatican does not reveal a single hidden master controlling events from the shadows. Instead, it reveals a tapestry of human ambition, curiosity, belief, and conflict. Every generation inherits institutions built by the past, and every generation creates new groups, new ideas, and new networks that attempt to shape the future. Some of those networks operate openly, others remain hidden for a time. But eventually history brings most of them into the light. Archives open, documents are studied, stories once whispered in secrecy become subjects of historical research, and through that process, the mystery slowly transforms into understanding. Yet even as knowledge grows, the sense of wonder never completely disappears, because the past will always contain unanswered questions. There will always be meetings that were never recorded, conversations that were never written down, and decisions made by individuals whose motives can only be partially understood. This uncertainty is not a flaw in history. It is part of what makes the human story so endlessly fascinating. And perhaps that is why the legends of secret societies continue to capture the imagination. They remind us that behind every official record lies a deeper landscape of ideas, relationships, and ambitions. A landscape where faith, power, and curiosity intersect in ways that shape the destiny of civilizations. As we close this journey through centuries of hidden organizations and powerful institutions, one final thought remains. History is rarely as simple as the stories we tell about it. But the search to understand those stories is what keeps the past alive. And somewhere within the archives of the world, waiting patiently on shelves of ancient parchment and forgotten letters, there may still be secrets that future generations have yet to discover.
And so our journey through the hidden corridors of history comes to an end. For centuries, powerful institutions and secret societies have moved through the same world, sometimes as rivals, sometimes as silent observers of one another. The Vatican stood as one of the most enduring centers of spiritual authority. Around it, across generations, countless organizations appeared in the shadows. Knights who guarded sacred lands, brotherhoods who gathered in candlelit lodges, philosophers who believed knowledge could reshape the future. Some of these groups disappeared into history. Some became legends whispered across centuries, and some may still exist in ways we do not fully understand. The truth is that history is rarely simple. Behind every official story lies another layer waiting to be explored. Forgotten documents, hidden alliances, ideas that quietly shaped the course of the world. And that is exactly what we explore here. If you enjoy uncovering the forgotten mysteries of history, the secret organizations that influenced empires, and the stories that rarely appear in traditional textbooks, then you are in the right place. Welcome to Forbidden Lore. This channel is dedicated to the hidden side of history, the lost orders, the mysterious figures, the unexplained events that shaped civilizations. If you would like to continue exploring these stories with us, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new journey into the past. And if you enjoyed tonight's story, take a moment to leave a like. It helps the channel grow and allows more people to discover these forgotten chapters of history. But for now, as the night grows quiet and the world slows down, we leave the archives behind and let the mysteries rest once more. Because somewhere in the pages of history, there are always more secrets waiting to be discovered. And when the time comes, we will return to uncover them together, right here on Forbidden Lore.